And there was this stunning security breach. Secret Service now says it's working with Scotland police to track down a paraglider who flew into unauthorized airspace near President Trump. Look at this video. It shows you just how close he got, was able to get to the president while he was at Turnberry, the golf resort. This was last night.
We're told the Greenpeace protester was flying a banner that read Trump well below par, #resist. Phil Black is in the city of Edinburgh, where protests are happening there right now. Phil, what are people there saying to you about their reasoning for being there?
Christy, I'm standing in this park in the middle of Edinburgh, the Scottish capital, surrounded by thousands of people who repeatedly say that Donald Trump is not welcome here. The main reason is that they simply don't like his policies. They disagree with what he has to say on things like immigration, climate change. They disagree, they say, with what they believe to be his attitudes towards women. So thousands of people here, and of course the unmissable thing behind me over my shoulder is the baby Trump balloon. It is also here. After flying over London during those protests yesterday, it was deflated, loaded aboard an overnight train, transported up here, and it's now been brought here for these protests as well. Its tour of the UK has also continued. The crowds here have been marching through the streets of Edinburgh today. The atmosphere, very much like London and Glasgow yesterday, it's festival-like. It's pretty happy, even though some of the chants, some of the messages and banners and things that have been carried here are pretty blunt and to the point. And as I say, the overall message is that there are many people here in Scotland who don't want Donald Trump to be here and to be honoured in the UK in the way that he has been. You mentioned that daring airborne protester at Turnberry at the Trump Golf Resort there. Well, on the ground today around the security perimeter, there are smaller protest groups trying to make themselves heard, trying to shout out to the president as he's making his way around the course there today. Victor, Christie, back to you.
All righty, Phil Black, thank you so much. Now, President Trump is not planning to cancel his meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. That's despite many lawmakers asking or demanding that he do so after the Mueller team indicted 12 Russians for meddling in the presidential election in 2016.
It's not unusual for a U.S. president to cancel a summit with Russia. In 2013, President Obama canceled his meeting with Putin after Russia granted asylum to Edward Snowden. CNN international diplomatic editor Nick Robinson is live in Helsinki this morning. Nick, the first question to you is about the interference after this indictment. We know the president will talk about it with him, and he's framed it that he will ask him firmly. What are we hearing so far from the Russians?
Well, the Russians, perhaps unsurprisingly in this situation, are just pushing back completely right across the board. They're saying, look, there's no evidence for this. This is a recycling of fake news. It's shameful that this is criminal cases being made up for a political agenda. Indeed, they're saying that this has been done intentionally to spoil the atmosphere coming into the summit. This issue has come up before when President Putin and President Trump met last year, a year ago, 7th of July, back at the G20 in Hamburg in Germany, and they spoke there for a couple of hours. We got out from Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and from the Russian foreign minister of exactly how President Trump then framed this issue with President Putin, this meddling. And of course, back then, there hadn't been the indictments. There hadn't been this body of evidence that's now presented that the Russians say doesn't exist. But listen to how Sergei Lavrov dismissed this issue a year ago.
President Trump said, and I'm sure either he or Rex Tillerson himself will say, that this campaign of alleged Russian interference in U.S. elections is of a strange nature, because there hasn't been a single fact in all these months of allegations, which was recognized by those in Congress who were leading this movement at a certain point and brought various administration members on the carpet. President Trump said he's heard Putin's very clear statements that this is not true and that the Russian government didn't interfere in the elections and that he accepts these statements. That's all.
So this brings us to two issues here, Victor and Christy. One issue is how President Trump frames it, and we heard from Sergei Lavrov there, and we later learned more, that President Trump sort of framed this, he framed it in the terms of there isn't evidence. The Russians are now pushing back because they say there's no evidence now. So President Trump actually has this body of evidence in the form of the indictment. So the question has to be now, will he then present some form of this to Putin and say, look, here it is. Here's what we have. But we know as recently as the past couple of days, President Trump has said, well, all I can do is say, did you do it? Don't do it again. And he'll probably deny it. So I think at the moment, for a lot of people, the questions are being raised. How firmly is President Trump going to push it, even though he has the evidence now? Because we know exactly what the Russians are going to do. They're already just trying to push it off and say, no, it's not true. It's just a political scheme.
All right, Nick Robertson for us there in Helsinki. Thank you.
Now, President Trump is blaming President Obama for the Russia meddling. Director of National Intelligence, however, Dan Coates, says the threat of cyber meddling from Russia isn't over.
It was in the months prior to September 2001 when, according to then CIA Director George Tenet, the system was blinking red. And here we are nearly two decades later, and I'm here to say the warning lights are blinking red again.